Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we'll let people in as they click on. We're thrilled to have four experts here to talk to us about what we can expect in 2024 and then a brief look at what we saw in 2023. We're joined by Dr. Dawn Tilmani McFadden, and she is a professor and Ag Resource Economics Director. Dr. Jennifer Martin, she's a meat specialist and assistant professor at the College of Agriculture and Sciences and Animal Sciences. We have Brittany Romano, executive director at Startup Colorado, and Michael Gable, who is the director of the Food Innovation Center at the CSU Spur. Just a couple little housekeeping. Please mute your microphones. This just eliminates background noise. That way our speaker who's speaking can do, they can be heard by everybody. We want questions and really encourage them. Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat and we'll address them, but we'll certainly ask for questions after each speaker. And then again at the end. So we want this to be very interactive, so don't hold back. And if something comes up after the webinar, you're welcome to let me know and I'll connect you with these folks, or you can connect directly with the speakers. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn. And as I mentioned, Dawn is a professor of agricultural economics. She's also the director of the Northwest and Rocky Mountain USDA Regional Food Center and the co-director of the Regional Economic Development Institute at Colorado State University. She serves on the Colorado Food System Advisory Council, and her research and outreach focus on food systems and rural economic development, primarily focused on opportunities related to value-added food market supply chains. Dawn, thanks for joining us, and I turn it over to you.
Great. Well, hope technology works. So I'm pulling up my slides. And Barb did give us the challenge of trying to talk about some things that we thought were happening or coming down the pike that might be interest to people working in the industry, just to keep you apprised. So I did a quick overview of some topics, not going nearly as deep as you probably want to go, but for anything that I cover today, happy to get you more information. I'll put a link or I can put links in the chat later while other people speak where you can find out more information. So usually when we start talking about marketing as academics, we put it into one of the 5 Ps that kind of drive markets. So I use that as a challenge today to try to give you at least one big trend I think is underlying each of those 5 Ps right now. And I'm using a variety of information. Sometimes I've just found industry reports that would be available to you all as well. But we're lucky in the fact that we have both survey on the ground right now, actually, for the USDA that's nationwide on consumer behavior. And then last year, the Colorado Department of Agriculture let us help them look a little bit at public attitudes across the state. And so you'll see a little bit about that. A couple takeaways I'll tell you right now, and that are relevant to why we're talking about this at Colorado Prouds event, is that local continues to be a key product differentiation. So I'll spend a little bit more time on that than average. And that marketing channels are continuing to matter more and more. We used to think of the US as a place that had moved to all being grocery store shoppers. And when I came into the field, 95% of that, the food was going through some of those mainline channels. And now we're seeing this fragmentation where people are shopping in lots of different ways. And we'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about why promotion matters. Again, we're on a Colorado Proud webinar. So we're going to talk about what we know about promotion and feature one great case study, Pueblo Chili's. So some key insights you can find from partners who are out there going on in the marketplace right now. I gathered a couple. Both the Hartman Group and Mintel put out some pretty interesting studies. But to the left-hand side, it's kind of more of a product orientation in the fact that, we are seeing people embrace wellness in a lot of different ways. And diet, low fat, and low sugar are no longer the things people use. People are talking about holistic care. We just had an awful event talking about the great nutrition of organ meats, and those kind of conversations are happening in lots of places. We're seeing beverages continue to get lots of attention in the marketplace and a higher share of food dollars. We're seeing that different generations buy very differently, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And that sustainability, kind of like wellness, continues to resonate, but people are thinking about it very differently than they did. And that's part of this new green revolution. But what we're also really seeing from the right-hand side, you can see, is like the personalization of markets. And very much people actually want to have a better alignment with the values of the products they buy, and where possible, relationships with the producers who make them. This is all good news for local markets. So these are very, very tentative. And in fact, this survey is not done. It's still on the ground, but we're asking people about their food behavior choices in October 23. And one of the questions we asked is, what are the 3 factors that motivate most of your food purchases? Obviously, since we asked for 3, this is why these add up to more than 100%. But you can see, not surprising with where food price inflation is, affordability is still dominant, but healthiness and access are widely available are important. But you continue to see some of these things related to social responsibility, local, organic, also resonate with a pretty high share of households. When we did our own survey here in Colorado, that past survey I just overviewed, which isn't even out or public yet, and is national, here in Colorado, we see some of these same things resonate. People want fresh, safe, well-priced food. Obviously, not surprisingly, young buyers are the most motivated by food prices because they have probably the most constrained disposable income, whereas it's older respondents and higher income respondents who are really paying more attention to if it supports their community, their economy, and if it's local. And we'll return to some specific local products later. So I can't ignore the price dynamics are what top of mind with everybody. If we look at the left-hand chart, we've seen price inflation for food that I have not seen in my whole 25-year career. Over the last couple of years, it is finally slowing down. What I think will be a shock to people is the inflation is slowing down, but inflation just means the prices aren't going up any faster. For people waiting for prices to come back down, except for a few specific cases, that's probably not going to happen. And so people are adjusting their food budgets to that new normal. And what's been hard for our state, if you look on the right-hand side, is that food and price inflation has been nationwide. If you look down below, the national average has seen a 25% increase in their grocery bill since 2021. If you turn that attention to the Denver market, it's even more so. It's 44% increase in an average grocery bill. So we're really seeing people reassess where food sits in their food budget, and not everyone's making the same choices, and we could talk about that a little bit as well. So we asked people in our national survey, and this is again nationwide, and they're all telling us we are in fact spending a higher share of our budget on food, and it looks like that's permanent. So there's 2 things that can happen when you have food price inflation. People can react by moving away from food, but in fact, we're seeing people actually, partly because of inflation, but even if you do inflation adjusted prices, people are spending more on food even if you adjust for inflation. So people have decided to reprioritize food as a part of their budget on average. People are also spending a higher share of their time shopping or preparing food. So perhaps it's even just a more important part of their lifestyle now. They're also, a large share of them, paying more attention to where they shop and if those align with their preferences for food and the values they have. We're back to people eating out. We're having people at least return to where they were pre-COVID on eating out. And as you see, some people are even spending a higher share of their food budget away from home. And again, looking at a higher variety of markets they shop at. They're not just doing a one-stop shop anymore. For a more visual look at this, we looked at for people who shop different places, and we try to highlight here in this infographic ones that would be more likely to be market channels that people looking at local and regional markets would use. And you can see the consumers buying at those places value, prioritize, and are motivated by different characteristics. And that some of them admitted that even the changes they made during the COVID era, and now we're back to a new normal, affected permanently where they are shopping long-term. Again, I can give you links to more information on any of this. So one of the big trends we really saw in those changes is this move to online food. And this is just specifically for food away from home and restaurants. but I probably could find you a very similar graphic of the exact same thing happening with people buying groceries. We've just seen a complete escalation of the use of food delivery systems, sometimes going direct to the businesses, sometimes using a variety of platforms, including Uber Eats, DoorDash, and so forth. Usually, again, that's been food away from home, but we're increasingly seeing groceries and food products be part of those baskets as those platforms expand their reach. So that's kind of how and where people are finding their food and what they're motivated by. Let's talk about how you can harness some of that information on figuring out how to capture some of those food dollars for your own business or the groups you work with. So we had people, again, in our survey of Coloradans, and just Coloradans, say grown or raised in Colorado or Colorado Proud, the first two things they look for in label claims if they're looking at labels. Not everybody prioritizes them. And that 72% of them would buy more Colorado products if they were available, which means you have to find the stores, online platforms, and marketplaces that allow you to carry them. And they're branded well, so you can clearly say they're part of the Colorado food system. And if they're at least affordable, price, there's a little more sensitivity about. And more than 90% of them agree the places they're more likely to find them are farmers markets, farm stands, and CSAs. But of course, one of our goals with Colorado Proud and a Colorado State is to make that more ever present and ubiquitous in any store or platform they're shopping in. And again, we'll revisit this a few times, but we really look to Pueblo Chili's as an example of where a very targeted, thoughtful, deliberative marketing plan has allowed that exact market access and purchasing to happen. So again, from that same survey of 2022 of food producers, there's a lot of busyness here, but let's go to the bottom left first. We asked people both if they've heard of and purchased a product, both in 2022, our most recent survey, but one thing we wanted to look at, it changed across time, is how much that changed since 2016 when we last did the survey. And although the good news is for all products, we saw more people aware and purchasing Colorado products, look at those numbers for Pueblo Chili's. We have almost double the amount of people who are buying Pueblo Chili's than had been doing so in just the previous survey. And I think all of us would agree it is because that region and those producers have been very deliberate in their marketing campaigns. And so up to the right-hand corner, then that's purchases. But in the right-hand corner, you can see where awareness is on a variety of Colorado products. And again, the great news is there's lots of good news for a lot of products, and we will continue in future years to track those for some of our major producer groups. Again, how do people find out about us? Well, on the top right, you'll see some of our top food industry trends are that changing definition of value by consumers. Sometimes it's about price, but sometimes it's about the quality they're getting. But they also want minimalist messaging. They don't want to be oversold to. They want soft selling. This somewhat caters to social media because social media is where you hear about things, unless they're sponsored ads, through your friends, families, cohort, and influencers sharing things they enjoy. And then this last trend, which is kind of, I had even looked this up, weatherproofing provisions. This is this discussion of resiliency in supply chains, that there is no weather event nor public health event like COVID that will keep people from getting their foods. And oddly, that's leading us back to local and regional food systems as well, because we're trying to lock up those supply chains and make sure we're not sourcing from just one place on any food that we buy. So this bigger graphic is part of that messaging thing where even though we know social media is still something people tell you you should do, or you should get a website and be on the internet, and part of this graphic shows that is important to 10 to 30% of our consumers, where most people are really getting their references, particularly for food, are word of mouth. It's getting your customers to share what they love about your product with their friends and family. That is what's really resonating. Now, they might be doing that through social media or websites or influencing that way, but word of mouth is the easiest thing you can do and the most effective thing you can do to get people to try your food or market. And some of that goes hand in hand with local interaction, being present in good locations at major food events, and then the networks where foodies hang out in Colorado. So again, this turns, as I wrap up my presentation, to what I think is one of the most successful case studies, who's done all of these Ps really well. We have the Pueblo region, who really embraced that they're not going to let Hatch New Mexico chilies own the marketplace, and they're going to come in with their own product. Has spent a lot of time perfecting that product and its quality. Are continuing to look for value-added dimensions where they can get that Pueblo embedded and integrated into new products. Have great partners, as you see down below, with the restaurants and food service partners in that region. Are having events that allow for local interaction and people to come experience those food products. So I highlight this just because this case study really embraces all of those mega trends I just brought up are happening, and how they're responding and thoughtfully reacting to them in a way that's helpful. So with that, I'll just leave this, and you guys are going to get these slides, but this is a way to reach out to me if there's any of this information, because I was picking little nuggets from different things we've done. If you want a deeper dive on any of this data, I'm happy to share that with you all by link. So thank you for the time, Barb, and I hope I set up the rest of the speakers well.
Excellent. Great overview as always. Does anybody have any questions for Dawn? You can put them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand or just ask them.
Hi, this is Molly. Hi, Dawn. I was wondering, who promoted the Pueblo chiles? Was that like the Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Association, or is there a different entity?
All of the above. The growers had been coalescing and asking CSU to do breeding programs for over, almost 20 years now. Then when the Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association came in, they've certainly helped them coalesce. There's a Pueblo Food Project down there now, originally sponsored by their mayor's office, but now has lots of backers who decided to make it one of their keystone promotion programs. So I've really been, that's what I've been most impressed with. It's been come from several different directions, and a lot of different communities embraced it, partly because they also wanted that community to have a food identity. So it's like I said, we know about the ones that have been more historical, like the sweet corn, Rocky Ford melons, Palisade peaches, but this has been one of the more recent nascent ones, showing even if you didn't have that long-term reputation, it's still very, very possible to make these types of local and regional food systems sing and get popularity. So great question.
A very good question. Dawn, was any of the data available? Did it dig into maybe the percentage of monies now being spent 2023 to now on like what I would call whole foods versus prepared or ready to eat meals? I wasn't sure if we had an idea on how that split was looking at 2023 and maybe what we could expect for 2024.
People do still value convenience. We have an increasingly higher share spent on what we call processed or value-added foods. Now the processing is stepping back a bit, and you're seeing lighter processing steps, particularly in the freezer section. But we don't see that going away just because of the convenience mindedness of a lot of consumers. What we're seeing some evidence of, but we don't dig this deep, is that with that admins, that people are spending a little more time on shopping and preparation. When they do decide to cook at home, they're cooking more from scratch. So it's almost this like weird bimodal thing. When they're in a hurry and they're fast, they're eating even just snack bars for meals. But then that 1, 2, 3 day occasion where they're deciding they're cooking at home, they're building out a richer from scratch preparation, which is why that coalesces well with local markets, because we don't sell as many things that are ready to go. So it's really this bimodal thing, and people have to just allow the fact that there's going to be people who always want highly to eat away from home or process things for some of their meals, but wherever you can, grab some of that food dollar for what they are bringing back to food prep at home. Make sure it's Colorado proud wherever possible. But good question, and always a good couple of case studies to look at of where people have made inroads in getting people to think about where they can make it not seem so overwhelming or not so time consuming to prepare food at home.
Well, that's a good
You
point.
guys' recipes out of Colorado Proud are great examples. But let's turn over to the rest of the group, and then if people have questions about any of the data, type them and I'll put links to where some of those sources are if they want them. I just want to make sure everyone has time.
Great. Thank you, Dawn. Well, let's talk with Brittany. Brittany is the executive director of Startup Colorado and is known as a trusted and collaborative leader with reputable experience working within the rural startup landscape. She founded Thrive Yoga Studios, which is a Colorado-based franchise focused on supporting small business owners in the health and wellness industry. And her goal is to support rural entrepreneurs building business models that can thrive in any sized community. Brittany, thank you for joining us, and I turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Let's see if I can set up screen sharing smoothly today. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Just a quick survey. How many people have heard of Startup Colorado? Anybody? Maybe just raise your hand or... Okay. Well, I made the assumption that most people probably wouldn't have heard of us. And so just very quickly, Startup Colorado was founded at the University of Colorado Law School with Phil Weiser and Brad Feld. It was originally meant to help support student entrepreneurs and scaling startups on the Front Range, but it became so obvious that there was a huge gap in resources and funding, specifically in rural Colorado. So Startup Colorado shifted its attention to support the foundation and success of rural-based entrepreneurs. And then how many folks here live in rural Colorado or own businesses in rural? Anybody? Everyone's camera is off, so it's hard to know. Well, that would be good to know. So Dawn, you presented so much good news, so many inspiring trends and statistics that'd be very uplifting for either existing entrepreneurs or those who are interested in getting into owning their own businesses. We've noticed at Startup Colorado that it's fairly clunky to be an entrepreneur, to figure out what where all the resources lie. But regardless, Colorado is leading the nation as an epicenter of startup culture, and that includes products and service-based businesses. The CPG trends are clearly defying the concerns, and that's occurring globally, which is, like we said, very inspiring. But with that being said, when we're actually talking about starting businesses in Colorado, specifically rural, we want to make sure that entrepreneurs can be successful and are considering all the barriers and challenging trends that we're also seeing, specifically when it comes to entrepreneurship in 2024. So with that being said, I don't want to be the doom and gloom part of this presentation. I promise I'll bring it around. But I wanted to just bring up some of the anticipated challenges that are being discussed across the state. There are the most obvious, which include inflation leading to challenges with cost of living, the supply chain issues, limited and affordable local manufacturing, interest rates, tighter lending, and so forth, right? We're all quite familiar with those conversations. The not so obvious challenges entrepreneurs are facing include access to affordable housing and affordable housing availability, general social determinants of health issues, needed improvements with connectivity and broadband, lots of outside investments favoring luxury developments. We've all heard of this. We all know this from living in Colorado. I bring this up, and I'll come back to this. These are real challenges that entrepreneurs are facing and will continue to face. So I'll put a pause on that for now, because I will go into that in a little more detail. But what I want to present is this data here about the importance of new startup businesses being created and how that affects rural and how it affects our local economy. So if you look at this first grid first chart here, you'll see that big exponentially larger green rectangle, that represents the number of jobs being added by businesses opening in just the first 12 months of business. So even as those businesses experience some attrition from year 1 to year 20. So first grid here shows first 12 months of business jobs being added by new businesses created. This grid is showing the downward trend of businesses not lasting over a period of 20 years. But this one right here is the most significant. And it's because it's saying that even high level, even as the businesses close over time, those jobs remain in local Colorado. And so it's not just that small business is the true engine of economic growth. It's these new job creating firms within their first 12 months are actually the catalyst and the engine of economic growth across our entire state. So these trends that Dawn presented are incredibly important in that we hope that it will continue to spur new economic activity, specifically within the food and beverage industry. So why do I present these challenges? I presented them because I wanted to have the opportunity to talk about all of the organizations that are working to solve these problems and to reassure that startup and small business entrepreneurs know that there's an infinite amount of people in your corner trying to solve these problems, so that you can continue to trailblaze and have a lot of success in your companies. So an ecosystem builder, 2 examples, 3 of us on the call right now, CSU, Colorado Proud, Startup Colorado, are all working tirelessly to solve problems so that these individual communities, whether that's industry specific or an actual town or county, have what they need to flourish. Any questions so far? Or thoughts? All right. We look at startup businesses in 2 different ways. And this is important for those considering who own businesses and considering owning businesses, because the way that you'll utilize resources, the way that you'll exist within your community and exist within your industry will be slightly different if you're a small business that's trying to stabilize a local economy versus being a startup scale up that's trying to export outside of your region. And so we can just leave it at that. There's a different trajectory for each type of business. And we're all trying to solve for these problems along that trajectory, depending on what stage you are in, depending on what your client needs are, depending on what pricing, product, and promotional and aspirations look like. There's plenty of entities involved, getting heavily involved in those conversations. So I presented all of those challenges, not to dissuade anybody and not to be discouraging, instead to catalyze the conversation and recognize that yes, we're walking into a pretty difficult economy and difficult business environment for 2024. And yes, these cycles of business are challenging, but they're incredibly important. The key to surviving is to be as prepared as possible, to understand and take advantage of tools and resources, to join organizations like Colorado Proud, and then to learn to be resourceful and learn from these inflection points, because not only is there a tremendous amount of learning to do, but lots of organizations are having a tremendous amount of success because they're able to be opportunistic in these kind of climates. So here's just a little slide, and Dawn, you covered a lot of these about like if you're considering opening a business in 2024, if you're inspired by the data trends, the consumer trends, then there's plenty of reasons why you can and likely will have success. The one, like I said in a previous slide, the best way to go about doing that and step more confidently into ownership and even growing or scaling your company is to be more prepared. Be more prepared than in previous economies and environments. So I'll share this slide with you. It's just coming back to like doing good business, being patient, doing your research, aligning yourself, leaning into communities, signing up for programming, being open-minded and sharing, being in an information exchange, and then of course, being flexible and patient, knowing that your business is likely going to take a different turn than you anticipated, and then kind of tying back to those consumer value statements, like choosing to be a good human, be a good community member, choosing to have products that are really servicing local and servicing and meeting the customer's values where they are. All of that will lead to having a very fruitful and rewarding entrepreneurial journey. So to bring this back full circle and to just reiterate the point that lots of businesses were started in this post-pandemic era. Lots of them are thriving and they are accelerating into 2024 with really strong momentum. We have, at Startup Colorado, we've worked with numerous companies in our pre-accelerator programs, in recent pitch series, in educational forums, and on technical assistance projects. We've seen them secure funding. We've seen them secure investors. We've seen them take new products to market, expand secondary lines of business. And these are just some examples of those companies that we've worked with. And then I believe Don and Michael, you both were a part of a recent pitch project, right? Where there were actually 8 food and beverage businesses that were located in rural compared to 2 that were located is it Denver Metro? I'm not sure where they were. So those are just some really strong examples of the momentum and the potential that exists. Yeah, so hopefully it's not all doom and gloom from me over here. And then just lastly about, again, just kind of diving into how Startup Colorado goes about servicing the ecosystem. Our mission is to promote a culture of potential through rural entrepreneurship so that people and places can thrive and chart their own futures. And we do this in a multitude of ways: ecosystem development, economic advancement, community engagement, and storytelling. We want to help, we can help. And here's our 4 main pillars. So for entrepreneurs who have sparked some interest in 2024, the ways that we might be able to support you are as follows. So we are launching a one-stop shop resource map that can connect you to pretty much any of the startup, scale up, small business resources that you'll need that will represent all of rural. So all 53 rural counties, all 11 rural regions. We have a Founders Co-opetition, which is a pre-accelerator program that begins in February, and we are requesting applicants to apply. We have a number of upcoming pitch programs, other programs and accelerators. We have an online community and with lots of community events. And then, of course, we want to help celebrate your success and continue to build upon the narrative of how collectively we are all building a better Colorado for future generations. So here's my contact info. And then that's what I have for today. I'd be happy to answer any questions or pass
Great
the baton.
Great job. We had a couple comments,
Oh,
no real
okay.
questions, but really great. We've got some really, obviously some great attendance here today. And there's just some comments about labor being a big problem. And is there anything you'd like to say about that? I mean,
Yeah.
how can we say it's a problem?
No, yeah, we can all collectively acknowledge that it's a problem. And there are a lot of initiatives that are trying to bring higher paying jobs to Colorado. There's a lot of funding through the Advanced Industries program and other high state level programs where they're trying to advocate and solve this problem so that we don't continue to experience what we could call just rural displacement by not being able to afford to keep jobs that are high paying enough to be able to support a certain quality of life in rural Colorado. So what can I say about that? I can say we need more representation and more vocal representation presented back to the ecosystem builders so that we can be sure to include ag specific. I think what you said in there was ag labor, and just make sure that there's some representation and voice, and therefore dollars being allocated to these projects and these industries as well, not just high tech. Right? That probably resonates with some folks.
That's a good point. I think this was a great overview, and certainly, you know, there's a lot of good things to think about. There's also challenges, which I think are going to exist regardless of the year and where you are. But something maybe to really reiterate is, you know, connect with these ecosystem builders, right, Brittany? I mean, they're out there. Obviously, Startup Colorado, CSU has tremendous programs and support for businesses. Reach out to us at the Colorado Department of Agriculture as well. So
yes,
well,
and
thank you.
I do hope that didn't, what I wanted to come, I do want to reiterate the fact that, like, yeah, these problems present regardless of the year, and businesses will continue to face these challenges. The important, like you're saying, engage, because no, this is not your business's objective to solve this, but as the business owner bringing products to market, your voice becomes an important part and an influential part of how this whole ecosystem, being an entrepreneur, how Colorado supports and fosters products being sourced here. Like, you become a key part in that equation. And I think it's important to not overlook that, and also to realize like that that's not your burden independently either. We want to be able to have when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about creating opportunities for long-term opportunities for entrepreneurs to thrive, like legacy style businesses that can outlast individuals and continue to support local, continue to support rural for the indefinitely.
Very good point.
Gosh, I hope that made some sense.
I think it was great. Does anybody have any other questions for Brittany? You have her information. Certainly can reach out to her directly if something comes up later on, but really good job. Thank you for all that. Well, let's go back to CSU and talk with Dr. Martin. She is the Associate Professor in Meat Safety and Quality and Meat Extension. She's a specialist in the Department of Animal Sciences at the Colorado State University. And in 2022, she was named a Presidential Leadership Fellow and currently spends her time assisting in university-wide strategic initiatives. She is originally from Central Texas and received her master's degree in 2010 and her PhD in 2014 from Texas Tech. Then she came to Colorado State University in the spring of 2015. Her research program focuses on the quality and safety of meat and related products, emphasizing exploration of solutions and opportunities with industry partners. In addition to research, Jennifer works closely with meat and livestock industry members across Colorado and across the nation. Notably, she is the coordinator of the Pet Food Alliance, which is a collaborative industry organization focused on exploring solutions for the pet food and rendering industries. She serves as a co-leader for the Upskilling Initiative, which is a workforce development program. She also plays an active role in on-campus programs, including the Provost Council for Engagement, Faculty Council, and numerous committees. In addition to her university work, she's involved in numerous livestock organizations across the country. Jennifer and her husband, Chad, as well as their dog, Mel, live in Timnath, Colorado. Well, Dr. Martin, you have a great resume to join us, so thank you for that. Based on all of that, I imagine you're quite busy, so I turn it over to you to share your expertise.
Yeah, hearing you say it makes me realize I should say no to something every now and then, but really happy to be here this afternoon to talk a bit about trends specifically impacting the meat sector. Meat processing has been a national conversation, specifically post-COVID, as it related to some of the supply chain challenges that we saw in Colorado was no different. Not only were we impacted as consumers by constraints within the meat supply chain, but we saw our processors in Colorado really face critical challenges, as well as unique opportunities. It's funny when I talk with meat processors across the state of Colorado prior to 2020, there was conversations of consolidation and companies closing because they weren't busy enough. And those days are long gone. Our processors today still remain busy and are at or over capacity almost daily. So perhaps there are some days where they wish post pre-COVID times were here so they could take a break because they're certainly swamped. But I'm going to go through just a series of a few slides to talk about some of the trends that we've seen, some of the challenges that are yet to come for the meat processing space, and how this plays a role with the trends that Dawn identified earlier, as well as some of the comments that Brittany made in just the prior presentation. So we talk about meat processing. The landscape for the meat sector has improved post-COVID, but there are still significant challenges. And I think as we go through these series of slides, it's important to not only highlight some of the successes and the major wins that have happened over the past year specifically, but how those wins really are just taking small bites out of the challenges facing not only our processors, but the food system as a whole. So let's first focus on the positive. I think some of the major wins that we saw in 2023 were a once in a lifetime investment in meat processing, both at the federal and state levels. So just to highlight some of the news articles that I took a clip of earlier this week to highlight successes that meat processors, not only nationwide, but even those in Colorado have encountered over the past year. We've seen, because of the investment, both federal and state levels, construction of new processing facilities, including one that's opening up near Fort Lupton later this year, the Wholesome Meats and Lockers, as well as expansion of existing multi-generational meat processing facilities across our state that we're seeing the wear and tear of time, as well as the increased capacity that they were struggling to accommodate post-COVID. So we've seen an investment that is historic. And I think this is something that meat processors are mindful of, and as a food system, we are thankful for. But the reality is that despite this investment in funds from the federal and state governments, it really hasn't addressed all of the challenges. And there's a really interesting article that highlights that I'll show the headline for on the next page. And while the investment of funds from the federal and state administrations have been helpful, it doesn't often address some of the more daily, tangible challenges that our meat processors are facing, including increasing operational costs. So as we've seen inflation, as Dawn talked about earlier, impacting our food prices, it's also impacting the operating costs of our meat processors. So as they see their operating and input costs increase, those are significant challenges, not only to maintaining business operations, but maintaining a competitive market where they can attract new customers and maintain their existing customer bases. As mentioned most recently by Brittany and kind of the questions that followed her presentation, the workforce challenge has been significant. And if there was one message that seemed to be the theme of 2023, it was the workforce challenges impacting the meat industry. And that's been a theme that we've seen in the larger processing sectors from our large meat packers, but we really saw those trends really begin to have tangible and very detrimental impacts to our small and mid-sized processors, particularly those in rural Colorado, who were not only faced with increased input costs, but a struggle to find skilled labor to actually do the jobs necessary to produce meat for people to consume. And that challenge has not gone away. And we'll talk a bit later on about some of the things that are happening to address that, both at the state, federal, and local levels. But it's certainly been a challenge that we've seen in 2023 and will continue in 2024. The other thing that has sort of been a unique challenge for our nation and Colorado specifically are some of the changing environmental and legislative challenges that our meat processors are facing. So one of the headlines that I posted there was some pending legislation from the EPA that will change the way that meat processors must handle wastewater and will likely then increase costs, especially for those meat processors who are in rural Colorado who may not have the wastewater infrastructure that we see in urban areas or for some of our larger facilities. And perhaps the one that I'm spending most of my time on now is an impending piece of legislation impacting the city and county of Denver that will ban the slaughter of animals as well as processing and sale of fur in the city and county of Denver. And most voters and most residents of Colorado may not recognize the impact that this piece of legislation will have, but a couple of key pieces to point out for this audience particularly. Colorado is second in the nation as far as lamb production goes, and one of our nation's largest lamb processors. So a harvest facility for sheep is located in urban Denver, just right behind the National Western Stock Show grounds. This impending piece of legislation would eliminate that facility. Not only would it eliminate the jobs of the employees who are housed there, but it would eliminate slaughter capacity for many of Colorado's lamb producers. This will be on the Denver ballot in November of this year. So it's to be determined and yet to see what will happen once the voters make their decision. But if that ballot initiative is passed, then we will see catastrophic potentially impacts to the Colorado lamb industry. And again, in our state, we're the #2 producer of sheep and lambs as well as wool. This will have major impacts that we will see ripple down not only our rural communities where these lambs are housed, but our food system as we remove lamb from the plates of many Coloradoans unless they're sourcing it from local and smaller producers or processors. The other thing that has been a topic that is not new at all to the meat processing industry, but seems to have been a theme that's gaining a lot of traction through 2023 and into 2024. And one of the reasons why this has gained quite a bit of traction is as we've seen an investment from our federal and state administrations in enhancing our meat processing capacity, it's been great to connect more consumers with local meats. But what it's also highlighted is that meat processors struggle with ways to find outlets for the parts of the carcass or parts of the animal that consumers in the US don't traditionally purchase or consume. And we often call those products offal or edible offal specifically. So they're organ meats and other parts of the animal that don't necessarily make it to the center of the plate in the shape of a steak or a burger or so on and so forth. And every year, for as long as meat processing has occurred, small processors bear the burden of finding what to do with these items. And there are a couple of things they can do. So in some spaces, excuse me, they can sell these items for use in cooking, right? So there are certain ethnicities, particularly certain regions of our state and country, where offal items or edible offal items are commonly consumed as part of the diet. More common globally than it is domestically, but it is still an outlet for these products. But most commonly, what we see our small processors doing is disposing of these products in the landfill. And not only does that create significant concerns as it relates to sustainability of the industry, it's a significant investment by these processors. So these are nutrient-dense, high-value items that processors that are not well connected to international markets struggle to move. They struggle to find markets for them. And so their only option is to dispose of them. And so not only are they losing revenue by not being able to sell these products or export these products to other countries, they're often also paying for their disposal. And so in Colorado, it averages about $100 a ton, plus the time it takes to transport to the nearest landfill, any accommodations that have to be made to those products before they're disposed of in the landfill. And that varies county to county and in some cases municipality to municipality, as well as the labor that goes into happening and to performing that task. So this is a significant challenge for our meat processors. And we've known about this challenge for some time, but as we've seen the investment, as facilities are ramping up their production, as we see new facilities come online, this challenge has certainly been highlighted. We're starting to see some interest in not only finding ways to market these nutritionally, so how they might be better connected to chefs and other culinary outlets where these items might be used, but also trying to see if there are ways that we can utilize the existing structures that are in place for the larger meat processors. And one of those is the rendering industry, where they take these items that aren't commonly used in human foods and will repurpose them for use in pet foods or in cosmetics or the medical industry or various things. The average small processor in Colorado does not have access to those same rendering facilities. But most recently, Senator Bennett, along with Senator Moran, proposed a piece of legislation that may change that and may introduce new small or regional rendering facilities to help our small and regional meat processors. A few things for us to look at for 2024. Meat processors will continue to diversify their market. So not only will they have to find ways to market products or to dispose of products, like I just mentioned on the last page, such as offal items, they will have to work diligently to increase their market access. Dawn alluded to the desire that Colorado consumers have to procure and to consume Colorado-produced meats. Sometimes the Colorado meat processors face challenges in accessing Colorado consumers. So we know that there are ways they can do that through farmers markets or through USDA inspected facilities, but not all of our facilities. And in fact, most of our facilities in Colorado do not have USDA inspection. And so they're limited on the market access that they have to Colorado consumers. So we'll still continue to find ways to connect those processors to markets they don't currently have access to. Excuse me. The other thing that we'll see in 2024, and this is reflective of some of the things that we've seen in 2023 with the beef cow herd in Colorado or in the US, and specifically what we saw in 2023, again, tying to the increase in input costs. So as feed prices went up, as the drought was impacting the majority of the Midwest and in some spaces, Eastern Colorado, we saw a massive decrease in the number of cows that we have in the US. And today's cow herd is at a 52-year low, meaning we have fewer cows today than we've had for the past 5 decades. For 2024, that means there's going to be less beef for consumers. And we know Colorado is known for its beef production. We will have less beef to produce in Colorado in 2024, which means that prices for beef will continue to be high in 2024. In general, meat prices along the board will be high because those input costs are continuing to increase as we see feed prices increase, the costs associated with water are continuing to increase, and so on and so forth. I believe, and this is particular to my space, that workforce will continue to be one of the biggest stories for meat processors in 2024 and likely beyond. It is very difficult for processors, particularly those in rural Colorado, to find access to skilled labor who can do the very challenging jobs that a meat processor requires. And I think this is something that is going to continue to impact not only the processors themselves, but availability of food to Coloradoans or for Coloradoans. And then lastly, the elephant in the room, if you will, is the impending legislation, not only that we'll see in the city and county of Denver and the outcome of that and what impact that will have on Colorado's meat processing sector, but also the legislation that was introduced by Senator Bennett, as mentioned previously. We've seen a historic investment in funding from the federal administration as well as the state administration into the meat processing and meat supply chain. Now we'll start to see some of the legislation that may impact the processes which support those processors. So they have the funding, but they need additional support to navigate some of the other barriers that they're seeing. I think one of the things that we're also going to see that is unique for small and mid-sized processors is collaboration among our processors. It's really difficult in the large processing space to see much interaction between competing packers, if you will, but our small and mid-sized processors recognize that they're better when they work together. So as they face challenges such as accessing markets for offal items or accessing freezer storage, which is a big challenge in Colorado, we're seeing them more and more work together to identify opportunities to address those challenges. And that's something that I think we should take pride in as Coloradoans, is there's always a way to address a challenge, and the nature of the West plays out among our processors because you see them really willing to work together and create new opportunities and when there's only previously been challenges. And I'll leave us with this piece. I talked about offal as kind of an up and coming trend and a challenge that's been introduced by, that has been highlighted by the influx of support that we've seen in the small and mid-sized processor spaces. I think one of the trends that we're going to continue to see in Colorado is local foods, but not only foods for humans, but foods for our companions. So pets are one of the largest consumers of animal proteins, and we know that the trends that we see in human foods tend to be mimicked among pets because the consumers of human foods are purchasing food for their pets. And so as human food consumers, us as people, demand foods that are produced locally for ourselves, demand foods that are of high quality for ourselves, we're also seeing those trends impact the pet food population or the pet food purchasers. A majority of Coloradoans have pets in their homes. So the national average is about 75%. In Colorado, it actually goes up to about 82% of Coloradoans have a pet of some kind in their home. And we have a large volume of Colorado consumers who are willing to spend their money on pet or food for their pets. They're looking to buy food for their pets that is produced in Colorado, highlighting the same things that we're highlighting for human foods as well. One of the opportunities for the offal items I mentioned earlier is this market that we see in the pet food community. Pets are a great consumer that we often don't talk about because they can't be here on a webinar like this to see all of the trends that are impacting what they're eating. But we know because we've seen these trends in human foods, we will soon see them in pet foods. And I think 2024 will be the year where it all comes together. And with that, I'm just going to leave you all with my contact information and save some time for questions.
Excellent. Does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? Feel free to ask them or put them in the chat. Jennifer, do you think we'll see 2024 bringing an extension or continuation of those grants for small processors?
I think so. There is a pending piece with Senator Bennett, the Butcher Block Act. I think we'll continue to see some amount of funds. I don't think we'll see the level that we've seen for the past 2 years. I think what we're seeing right now, unfortunately, is some of those facilities that have opened up because of those initial rounds of investment are struggling to stay open. And so I think we're actually going to see more of a focus over the next couple of years, not only in funding, lower levels of funding, but addressing some of the infrastructural barriers that exist to allow those processors to be successful, such as access to rendering. Workforce is a big challenge. We're going to see investment in those spaces to give them an infrastructure that they need to be successful versus just cash to build. I think those days are going to be waning, but we'll see other investments in the future.
No, that makes sense. Certainly need the supporting businesses around those businesses. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
it's not sustainable for them. So. Well, great job. Let me see.
I have
Kaylee.
a question, but I'll wait till after Kaylee. Sorry.
No, go. Kaylee is asking, is there a way to market the byproducts that processors are forced to dispose of to pet owners?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good question.
So that's a great question. And there is, I think one of the challenges that we see is they face the same regulation. So they must be inspected. Unlike USDA inspection that's required for meat processors to sell meat directly to consumers, pet food manufacturing facilities are inspected by FDA. So there are some regulatory barriers that are in place currently, but they're not without the ability for processors to overcome them. And I think one of the things that will play a role in doing as CSU, along with CDA and others, is to connect Colorado processors to the resources they need to access that market. The past has been really focused on accessing human markets, which is certainly important, but now we can recognize there's value in this market as well.
It's a good question. I know, Jennifer, you and I have interacted in the pet food world a little bit, and boy, there's also the perception of some of these products, even in pet food, which
absolutely
somewhat has to be overcome as well.
Yes,
but it's a great outlet and it's very valuable protein. So, Molly, what's your question?
Yeah, I was wondering, Jennifer, if the meat processing plants are banned from Denver city and county, is there federal funding to deal with that or state funding? I thought you mentioned that kind of right after.
That's a great question. So there is there's funding to deal with the displaced workers that would be offered by the state if the bill were to be passed. But there's not necessarily a plan to address the lack of processing capacity or the loss of processing capacity, especially for the lamb industry. So earlier this week, for example, I was visiting with one of Colorado's largest lamb processors or producers rather, And if that plant closes, the next closest place for them to send lambs to is California. So it would have very dramatic impacts on the ability of Coloradoans to secure affordable and accessible lamb products, unless those lamb products were produced by a smaller processor. What we think will happen is this will be catastrophic to Colorado's lamb industry as a whole, because we'll see if you can't market your lambs outside of the state of Colorado, the lamb consumption within Colorado doesn't justify production of lambs. So there are, to answer a long answer to your question, the short answer is yes for the displaced workers, but not for the impacts of the food system.
Very good question. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Great job.
Absolutely.
And you
Thank
all
you.
have her information if you'd like to reach out to her. She's a wealth of information as well as our other speakers that she can answer any of your questions. Well, let's move on to Mike. Mike Gable is the director of the Food Innovation Center at CSU Spur, and their goal is to support food innovators through value-added services, kitchen and processing facilities, and the creation of a space where ideas can prosper. Mike is a second-generation CSU grad in food science and human nutrition. And after a master's in food engineering from UC Davis, he started his 20-year career with roles in product development, quality systems, and strategy and portfolio management. He has led innovation teams at Windsor Foods, ConAgra Foods, and recently Barilla, where he spent the last 5 years at their HQ in Parma, Italy. Well, that makes me jealous. So, Mike, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barb. Can you allow me to share my screen? Sorry.
Done. I apologize for that.
No worries at all. All right. Let me flip this around. All right. Should be good. Thanks so much, Barb. Thanks to everyone else. It's been great food to chew on for what we've been talking about, especially how it impacts a lot of the entrepreneurs and movers and shakers in Colorado. So today I was asked to talk on different trends in food labeling, processing, and packaging. And so we'll kind of dive into that. Just a quick overview of who I am and what I do. So I lead our Food Innovation Center here at the beautiful campus of CSU Spur, right downtown Denver. If you have a chance to get out to Stock Show this next week or so, you can see our campus there. This is our building here of the 3 buildings dedicated to food and ag. And so in the basement or in the ground floor, we actually have our kitchens and our food processing spaces. And I'll kind of run through that real quick. This is our team here. Everyone that does everything from product development to sensory science or a taste testing program. And this is just kind of a laundry list of our services that we do here at the Food Innovation Center. Within our space, we have a beautiful culinary kitchen that we use for a lot of events. We use for product development. We use as a commissary kitchen for entrepreneurs. And then we also have our sensory and consumer research space with booths to kind of get low-cost sensory testing for entrepreneurs. These are typically reserved for larger CPG companies, and so we're really trying to get that cost down for a lot of these entrepreneurs that have only had feedback from grandma, from someone at the farmer's market, from their friends, and really don't have good unbiased feedback from consumers. And then lastly, we have a meat innovation lab, a produce safety lab, and also a dairy lab. And so these are wonderful spaces that we lease out, but also serve as an educational platform for food safety, for professional training, for even fun things like having a summer camp and having local kids from throughout the state come and learn about dairy, make some cheese, and just have a good time. So within that, I wanted to start just with talking about labeling. And so we see that this is not a new trend by any means, but the amount of labels that we see coming forth on food products, 1 in every 3 products has some type of health claim to it. And so probably the hardest, and so I'm going to work backwards. This is not the hardest, but the most energy intensive part is getting a certified label. And so that's USDA organic, that is non-project GMO verified. So any of these labels here require a great amount of auditing and preparation from the producer, from the processor to get under wrap. The next level is probably the clean label, and so this could be anything from preservative free, from having any health claims that are based on fact, and so high in protein, high in calcium, high in any of the macro and micronutrients in them too. And so a lot of people want to see this, and so we actually see that quite a few of the entrepreneurs that we work with in our space are coming with a laundry list of what they want to see: dairy free, nut free, whatever else, allergen free. And so in these spaces too, we work to help them to get on board and understand this. And this is really where consumers are interested too, just because they want things that are organic, that are preservative free, that kind of fit this bill of health that they want too. And so even more and more that we've seen recently are what we're calling the new certifications. So you've seen the organic everywhere. So certified humane, certified grass-fed, glyphosate free. So a lot of these big buzzwords that people really want to latch onto and go forward with. We're even seeing upcycled. So this is a certification that was born out of a food company that was doing a upcycled waste product from soy milk processing. And so they were actually taking that, and so they said, we need to have something that kind of illustrates that these processors are using certified upcycled protein or ingredients coming from byproducts of processing. And so we'll see a lot more of these going to come out as these new buzzwords, as these new different people want to latch on to different health claims and really that speak to them. So along with this, and so a lot of these are more on the larger scale, we're going to go on talking about processing tech. And so these are things that might not apply to smaller processors, but I think they're still to keep in mind to say, all right, as we grow, as we scale, what could kind of be the resources for Colorado entrepreneurs, for producers, processors to be looking into, just because these are what consumers are looking for. They're looking for higher quality products. And so modern advances, and so a lot of people might look at these and go, all right, I don't want to know what happens behind the scenes, in the processing facility. But I think a lot of these kind of speak to that processors and manufacturers are listening to the consumer. They really want them to be cleaner label. And so that kind of speaks to what I just spoke about, having clean labels on and so things like high pressure processing. So this is a technology that's been around for many decades now, but this is something that we've seen an upsurge with anything that is resistant to heat treatment. So we're talking about guacamole dips or tzatziki or anything else that's kind of in that space, fruit juices, anything that kind of loses its flavor as it's been pasteurized or anything else. And so we see Hope Foods is here in Boulder. A great example of that. They brought this technology. We've seen a lot more toll processors and so co-packers that have this capabilities to be in this space. And I think it's really interesting to see as this proliferates, the amount of, and so if you don't know the technology, this is just essentially putting the packaging and everything else under high pressure, and that kind of deactivates any potential pathogenic microorganism, extends any spoilage, for many weeks. It can actually double or 10 times the amount of shelf life that a product has on it. And so this is something that we're seeing more accessible, more available, and really kind of speaks to that quality that people are looking for, especially in that refrigerated category. Before I get to the next, what we've seen a lot, especially over the last 20 years or so, is really this kind of doubling up on different existing technologies. And so we're talking about preservation technologies. We're talking about so you've all heard of pasteurization and canning and different aspects of this. And so actually it was interesting. I was at a Big B's. They are a cider producer in Hotchkiss. I was actually there with Don and a couple other people this summer, and it was great to kind of see their facility. And so they were doing traditional heat, high temperature, short time pasteurization. But they also had a UV pasteurization line. And so I was talking to Jordan Lambert, who is our Ag Innovation Center director. And so she was saying, she comes from a dairy background, and she was saying nowadays what they've done is they've done a lot of the combination of these technologies. And so you can actually decrease the amount of temperature pasteurization that you're doing by combining with UV pasteurization. So there's a lot of these technologies that have been around for a long time. They're just seeing the synergies that kind of happen when you place them together. And so one of the up-and-coming technologies we see is actually called microwave-assisted thermal sterilization or pasteurization, one of the two. And so this is just saying we've had microwaves forever. The canning process, as you all know, you just kind of put it in a can, you seal it up, and then you heat treat it until everything essentially dies. And so you have to put a lot of energy, a lot of heat. You're breaking down the nutrients, you're breaking down the quality of the food. to have that shelf stable product. And so this is really looking at ways that we can have like a full ready mill, something to this extent that is not so overcooked or has some of the burning or loss of nutrients. A lot of times within like a sterilized mill, you have to add a lot more salt or a lot more seasoning to really get it. So you're actually kind of deterring away from those health benefits of something like this. And so this is the same process. You're putting it in a container, so it could be just like a sterilized shelf-stable meal. You're putting it through there. It's being heated from the outside as the microwaves heat up the container around the water that goes through this vessel. And then the microwave heats from the inside, activates this water, and then it'll actually sterilize it in about a quarter of the time, if not even less, that you have. And so the quality goes up greatly. One neat thing that we see a lot for especially our processors and our growers is actually pulse electric field. And if you haven't heard of this, this actually takes me back to when I was in grad school. I was actually the husband of one of the professors that I worked for. He was doing some work for electrified individuals that got electrified working on the job or whatever else. And so he was actually making a protein kind of system that would actually heal the cell walls. Well, what we're doing is the opposite here. We're actually electrocuting the fruits and vegetables to actually make them, first of all, it's a sterilization method. And so we're looking at killing any pathogens. But also what happens is it kind of drives holes, just like an individual that got electrocuted, their cells are kind of damaged. And so we're actually damaging the cells. What happens there is for something that a juice producer or a wine producer, olive oil, whatever else, it's actually making tiny microscopic holes in there that allow you to extract more, get a couple, 1 or 2, up to 5% extraction, so a better extraction. For things like the potato manufacturers, you're actually creating different holes in there that allow it to dry out more because most of the French fries are pre-dried a little bit to have that crispy outside. And so there's a lot of processing applications here too, especially increasing yields, decreasing the amount of time that they have to do through the press or any of their of the manufacturing. I wanted to this is kind of big scale, large scale. I wanted to go into some things that might be more consumer facing that we were just seeing over the years. And so these are a little bit more fun of the trends that we're seeing, things like 3D printed foods. This is always going to be applying any technology that we see throughout in industry and tech in different avenues. And so we see AI already kind of being in food. AI created recipes. I'm sure you've seen different things with that. So 3D printed food is something that's not generally new, but it's looking at different ways of saying, all right, can we process food that, as for a pasta, couldn't traditionally be made through like a dye format through the extrusion process. On the bottom is actually a product from a company in the Netherlands, TNO. They're looking at even this for personalized nutrition. So this bar, they did a study that they published with the Dutch Army, or actually the Nordic, one of the Nordic countries. They did a study with the military. They're looking at personalized nutrition. So this bar would be sent out in the field. They could produce it there. That could be, modified to have a different protein or fat range or whatever else is the military individuals are more active or more passive. And so they could actually utilize this and modify that. And so there's some great possibilities there, especially if you think about, small scale production. And that's what I think, there's a lot of possibilities out there thinking instead of large scale production, really kind of targeting individuals. And that's what we see a lot. As you know, automation is coming everywhere. This is more public facing. So you're seeing a lot more restaurants or, the bartender, that's the robot, or the pizza. And this has kind of come and gone a little bit. I think this was really hyped up during the pandemic saying, but we're going to see a lot more of this probably behind the scenes more than kind of out front in, the restaurants that have the robot making the pizza or anything else. But we're looking as the labor shortage comes out that there's going to be more automation. There's going to be more efficiencies in cooking, in preparing, in contactless payments or whatever else, payment methodologies through the restaurants. So we see this a little bit more in the food service, a little bit more public facing. But also we know that any of the manufacturers are looking ways to automate just because the labor is such a critical. critical piece that's really hurting the margins of a lot of the producers that we see out there. And then there's also a lot of trends in food service. This is equipment that Chili's brought on to be able to cook a steak in 3 minutes. And so they said we can have a medium rare steak in about 3 minutes. They kind of slide it in there. This is just a glorified kind of panini press, George Foreman. But again, the technology is there for meeting consumer demands to say, all right, we can kind of deliver on this where you're going to have your meal within, 5 minutes versus waiting 20 minutes, half hour for a steak. Talking about packaging trends, packaging is super interesting. This is really where a lot of people are calling on us, especially we'll talk later on about kind of the plastic-free movement. There's a lot of neat things that are actually happening behind as far as the smart packaging, really having that packaging work for you to either kind of, regulate moisture. So you're actually, as you've seen, like at the bottom of every beef jerky, you have like the moisture sachet or the oxygen absorbers. And so they're making ways that we can actually incorporate that into the film. Things to remove the ethylenes, and so fruit and vegetables ripen kind of, homogeneously. Different antimicrobial aspects of that too. And so really, if you even have cross-contamination coming out of a processing facility, that you can actually kind of, eliminate that on the outside or even on the inside. And then just different ways to regulate that. So as you all know, the biggest detriments to food is, outside contamination, but also your oxygen and your moisture. And so this is really kind of, taking advantage of all these different places. I'll give you a quick example. This is Carlsberg beer, what they actually have in that headspace. And so if you think about it, glass is a great medium. It's fairly impervious. It's very inert. And so it's a great way to package anything. But what you have left is in the very top, you have that headspace. And so there's just the slightest bit of, even if the nitrogen flush, you still have a little bit of oxygen or something else that's getting in there. And so what they've done is they've put an oxygen scavenger in the seal. And so what that's doing is that's just taking that little bit of oxygen that's left in there, taking it off, so you remove any of that oxidation that happens in that beer. So if you get any skunky flavors, it's usually typically oxidation or different things happening there. So they've eliminated that. Intelligent packaging is really interesting. So these are just using sensors, fairly low-cost sensors. We've seen like the RFID for tracking, for the blockchain, a lot of that advantage to kind of come back, and even the QR codes that we see on to even track it back to the farm or the different facilities it was processed in, so you can kind of see that journey. Consumers want visibility, they want transparency, they want to know kind of where their food comes from. And so a lot of these tie back to that too. But they also want to know, sensors, is it fresh? Is it the gas indicators? This is another example here that's technology from about 10 years ago. And we're seeing that we'll see, the ripeness indicator. So based on the ethylene, it'll actually turn this indicator different colors to say, all right, is this overripe? Is this perfect? Or this, a little bit underripe, and wait for it. So a lot more of that technology, as that technology comes down, will come back down to providing that transparency to consumers to say, all right, I know where my food comes from. I know if it's safe to eat. I know that, this is the right. I really want to know, just because a lot of complaints that come through, I worked in quality for many years, and the complaints that come through really are, consumers not eating in the right way or preparing in the right method. And so a lot of these kind of take it makes it a no-brainer for preparation and consumption of the product. Planet-friendly packaging, we know this is kind of the hot topic of all the hot topics. It's been for many years, and so this is really looking at what we do to eliminate that plastic. A lot of it comes through the packaging, and so we see that plastic waste, every time you see a picture in, the west coast of Africa, where it's just kind of washing up on the shores. I mean, it's something that the packaging companies are looking for. And really, there's a lot of good advances, and so we'll kind of go through that. Plastic-free packaging, we see like an upsurge in the amount of paper. There's been a 5% increase year after year for that, just because we're seeing that typically plays best for immediate consumption. So we're talking about, food service outlets, restaurants that have that, just because it doesn't provide a great oxygen or moisture barrier to it, but it shows the consumers, we're trying. And then we'll talk about kind of bioplastics here in a bit. Edible packaging is something else that I was surprised. This is a $1 billion market right now that's expected to grow to like 1.5 or 1.4 billion by 2030. And so this is really looking at, using probably more so not as a primary packaging, not something that you're going to hold or something else is going to touch in the supermarket, but as like a powder sachet or something that you can, not necessarily always edible, but like soluble, that will go into like a coffee drink. So you'll take your coffee or your tea or whatever else, and it'll be soluble within there. And so a lot of these are seaweed packaging based or cellulose or anything else that would dissolve. The middle image you see there is actually a coating that they have for like a food service for a hamburger. So you could actually eat that through the hamburger. I don't know how that'd be, but I can imagine it'd be interesting to say the least. But a lot more of this edible packaging is come onto the market now. And the last is the bioplastics. And so we see this kind of upsurge. This is where there's a little bit of controversy. There's a little bit more of the different packaging companies trying to understand how to best utilize this, because not all bioplastics. And so you have traditional packaging, your PET bottles that come from petroleum-based products. And so you have your bioplastics, which are usually from sugarcane or some type of starch that were, transformed, fermented, and then actually the base product was utilized that. And the processing still about the same as a traditional bottle. And so what we've seen is some bioplastics, even if they originate from corn or whatever else, they're not necessarily compostable or biodegradable. And so this is where there are a lot of more individuals are saying, consumers have wised up a little bit too and saying, even though it's a bioplastic, I want it to be compostable. I want it to be biodegradable. I want to know that this is actually being taken care of. And so there's a lot more. PLA is a good example of this. This is a fermentation product. This is great. We're seeing a lot of these upcyclings of these byproducts coming out. And so you really just have to give a substrate for the bacteria to create this. The lactic acid is polylactic acid. And so through that fermentation, you actually are able to extract these chains of carbohydrate so that actually act as like a plastic. And so through that, we're seeing a lot of efforts around, finding waste streams to kind of feed this fermentation product. And that could be, it's better if it's a single source. We've seen a lot of people just trying to use like, landfill garbage, whatever else, but, you have to have a fairly consistent diet for these microbes to feed on, that you kind of know the end product of what you're getting out. So compostable products, this is a $25 billion a year industry, and so this is looking to grow and grow. We see this everywhere as far as packaging, as far as even sturdy consumer goods go, and takeout. I think you'll be hard pressed to find many of the restaurants throughout the state that are really kind of moved to this bioplastics. And so in the end, this is kind of where I'm wrapping up to. Just saying there's lots of great trends out there. We're seeing a lot of good technology. Colorado is kind of one of these big hubs for innovators and entrepreneurs. Aside from Silicon Valley, you see a lot of people from Boulder, but also from the rest of the state. As Brittany was saying, it was great to see this pitch competition where throughout the state, we're seeing a lot of wonderful individuals coming, sharing, and really kind of looking forward to being Colorado proud for sure, really kind of exhibiting that, Colorado is a place for innovation, is a place for growth, is a place to see kind of some of these trends, kind of be the trendsetter in what we see in food and beverages in the next little bit. So thanks for your time.
Excellent job. Very interesting, all the work that's being done. Does anybody have any questions for Mike?
Hey, Mike, I have some questions.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
first of all, that seaweed-based packaging, that's really interesting and really cool. A lot of things that you presented are pretty exciting. I have a question about the certifications, the labeling.
Yes.
When I buy something like from another country, like chocolate or coffee, it's like fair trade certified or direct trade certified. Is there something here in the States, like domestic fair trade or fair food? Just thinking about like how workers are treated, how farmers are treated, that type of thing.
I haven't seen anything, and that's actually a great point. I think there's something to be said about, kind of, seeing that on a domestic level. I think it's always been kind of more pointed out to the third world countries where we're sourcing a lot of our raw materials. But I haven't seen anything like that. And so it's a great question. It's a great food for thought, to be honest with you.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Anybody else? I think something that I found very interesting, Mike, was, all the work that's being done in like the food safety aspect, right? Which is critical,
Absolutely.
especially when it comes to packaging and shelf stable, things like this, and how that's really going to intersect with sustainability and recyclability, biodegradability.
They all
That's
gotta
what
play
I'm
hand in
really going to
hand,
be
yeah.
watching.
I even got the recall alert from Safeway today saying something we bought, had a salmonella contamination. So I think these are all kind of hot topics. No company wants to see a recall notice on their product. And so especially talking to the smaller entrepreneurs, making sure they're set up. And I think that's really helping them have all the keys. It's hard to navigate some of these waters with FDA, USDA. This is really kind of critical for them to understand. We try to set right as many people as we can, but for the most part, they're doing good as long as they're kind of following the basic outlines. And then, we always kind of talk about the graduation from cottage food into something bigger if they want to produce these, potentially hazardous food, what they need to do. So it's fantastic.
Wow, that was fantastic. Obviously, you have Mike's information if you'd like to reach out to him. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to engage with you and answer your questions. Maybe last call for any questions for any of our great speakers. You have their information, and I just want to thank everybody, Dawn and Jennifer, Brittany, Mike, for your time. You're very busy. This was fantastic. I'm sure our Colorado Proud members will get a lot out of this. And I want to thank all of our attendees. Great interaction, great engagement, and great questions. Molly, go ahead.
Oh, that was my clapping my hands. That was
Oh, I'm
always very
sorry.
interesting.
I'm sorry.
I like using these reactions emojis. Anyway, I learned a
I
ton.
thought it was your hand, so I'm sorry. That was funny. All right. Well, thank you guys. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.